Have you ready, Chue? I told you.
I hope my volume is okay. Is it okay? Can someone test it for me? No? My bad.
No, you're good.
Hey,
you're good,
cool.
bro.
Alright, good to go. Alright, hello. This week is going to be about pen testing, and my name is Troy. Yeah, it's pen testing. Brief introduction. My name is Troy. My last name, I'm Troy. I'm pretty much a super old dude from Korea. I was tech lead for 2 years, tech lead and then junior tech lead for the last 2 years. I'm currently the CPTC captain of this year's team, and I'm trying to be Scott 2.0, but I lack his social module, so I'm just trying my best every day. Cool. So I know this is like a quote-unquote pen testing week, but I kind of want to go over some of the basics of offensive security first. So traditional security is about having a target and trying to defend it. Offensive security, on the other hand, is a quote-unquote being a professional devil's advocate against a target. And here, you really want to do some proactive and adversarial approach to security. However, the goal of offensive security is pretty much the same. We still try to help clients with their security, but we're just giving them a fresh set of perspective from the attacker's point of view. One of the interesting part of offensive security is that you need to have the knowledge of the defender and the engineer or the builder, and you need to know the attacker. So you need to have this like all-around perspective in order to do offensive security. So the goal of this week's education and RISSEC and RBEP in general is to have that proper mindset of offensive security. And from the technical point of view, this mindset is about building your own methodology. So when you're given a target, you try to understand the target first, you do some proactive research on it, and then you do exploitation and you write a report upon it. So anyone can pretty much run a command, anyone can install a tool and run it. That's the easy stuff. The hard stuff is actually building your own methodology, and that's our goal here. And for the non-technical mindset is that don't forget that offensive security is a business after all. You know, no matter where you go, unless you're self-employed and you don't interact with any kind of business entities out there, you have to do some business. And in business, you have to provide some value. So offensive security is not about, or pen testing in that matter of sense, it's not about just hack, and just being done with it. You need to create some value out of it. So everyone who joins offensive security for the first time or who have not heard about it wants to be this Chad hacksaw. You know, drops the exploit. You know, I hacked you in 20 minutes. Man, your team's security sucks, man. Like, what is scope? Or just turn off DNS, just be done with it. It's so easy, man. However, the reality is not really that, you know, Chad-ish. You have to leave your ego, and your number one goal should be trying to help with the client. And you also need to know some of the base knowledges of how the operating system works, how the networking works, and how programming works. So there are a lot of types of offensive security, and this is not an extensive list by any means, but I want to kind of go over some of the types. So vulnerability assessment, back in the days, it was pretty easy-ish because all you needed to do was to set up a scanner, point to something, configure it, run it, and you're done. Nowadays, these vulnerability scanners are getting really advanced, integrating machine learning and also integrating automatic patching as well. So if you're really into software engineering, but you also want to do security-related stuff, you know, building this kind of vulnerability scanner or solutions is a really, really good way to go. Application security is another branch of offensive security, which is pretty much self-explanatory. You try to find vulnerabilities in applications. And usually, we mean web applications in this case. External penetration testing is a type of penetration testing that you do as an external attacker. So you want to assess as many vulnerabilities as you want from the outside perspective. So you're trying to assess the vulnerabilities of the perimeter of your target organization. And this perimeter means pretty much any kind of server, services, or applications that is facing the internet. Internal penetration testing, again, pretty much self-explanatory. You're doing penetration testing from the inside of your target's network. Here, you still have a lot of limited scope, and it is pretty restrictive, and most of the time, social engineering is not allowed. And red teaming is pretty much a real-world attack simulation, and that's why if you look at the duration here, it is 2 to 3 months. It's a lot longer than the average some other offensive security engagements, because the red teamers are trying to simulate or emulate the real-world attacks. And one of the interesting things here is that there are a lot less rules in red teaming, and it really focuses on defense evasion, because the goal of red teaming is to test the blue team, the people of the client. So what exactly is a pen test? Oh, by the way, this slide was partially made through Scott. That's why he has a lot of like his doggo pictures. Yeah, I'm just going to go with it. So I'm just going to read off this definition because it is a really good definition. So a pen test is an engagement between two entities, a pen tester and a client, for the pen tester to do a security analysis of the target provided by the client. Now, the second part is the most important part here, that pen tests are not just attacking something and just being done with it. You need to methodically test the functionality of the environment and report it clearly on your findings. So again, you need to provide some kind of value back to your client. So pen testing is not red teaming, and red teaming in the professional sense is a lot different from red teaming in competition settings as well. So pen testers, the blue teams already know that we are there. We're just blasting our, testing, and we're just yeeting out in like 2 weeks, and that's it. We're there to like test the infrastructure, and that's about it. Red teamers, on the other hand, are there to test the people. So pretty much any kind of security department or any kind of MSSP that the client currently has. So the blue teamers, a lot of times, don't even know that red team engagement is going on. Probably the CISO will know about it, and only like a handful of people will know about it, but most of the blue teamers from the client side don't even know that there is an engagement going on. So from their perspective, it is an actual real-world attack, which is the goal of red teaming. So before we start, this is some kind of a general advice from Scott and me, I guess. It's that to document everything you do. So pretty much any kind of CTF, labs, side projects, competitions, the upcoming IRSEC 2, anything that you do, try to document the things that you did and you learned. For me personally, when I document everything, that really helps me to solidify the knowledge that I have in my brain into like a document. Now everyone like has different styles, so I'm not like, forcing you to document everything, but it really helps me to solidify my knowledge. So documentation really helps. Second is to, so anything that you do consistently, you should probably write it down. So in this case, I think this applies to like pretty much any kind of IT/security. Is that if you have your own cheat sheet for a specific domain, for example, in Pentesting, you see a Linux box and you see specific ports open. And if you have that cheat sheet, the list that you go down to check everything, it really helps you to speed up and have your methodologies down. So anything that you can create a cheat sheet upon on a specific domain, it will really help you out. And thirdly, of course, automate everything. So the types of penetration testing, we have already looked at it, but to go into a little bit more detail. So web application testing, a really good starting point is to learn how HTTP works and how networking works, of course. But if you got that basics down, which, by the way, you learn in our classes anyway, the next step is to learn the OWASP top 10. It's probably the most commonly found top 10 vulnerabilities in the real world. So starting from OWASP top 10 is a really good idea. To help you with that, Portsregard gave a free course and a free CTF or a lab. That's called Web Security Academy, and it is a really, really good course. It's just free. And Portsregard is the company who makes like Burp Suite. By the way, HackerOne's Hacker 101 is another good free web application-based security course and CTF as well, so make sure to check that out. Web Application Hackers Handbook 2, it's like the web application security quote-unquote Bible. It's a really, really good book. Definitely check it out. Pentest Labs, of course, really good as well. For mobile application, OWASP Top 10, the OWASP Mobile Testing Guide is a really good starting point. Also, if you're really interested in, talk to Emmanuel because I believe he's the mobile guy on RISC. And for other, Scott wrote down thin clients, thick clients. I have no idea what this means. I'm just going to move on. Network pen test, internals. So if you're into internal network penetration testing, probably the first thing that you want to go in and research upon is the Active Directory, because I know that a lot of organizations are moving into quote unquote the cloud, but they still use a lot of on-premise Active Directory. So you would really want to research on that. Secondly, you probably want to also research on the cloud settings or the integration of the cloud, mainly integration of Azure. Also, domain admin is not the end. A lot of people think that, hey, Pentest, you get domain admin and you're done with it. Chances are you probably want enterprise admin in the first place, and also you want to show the impact of what you can do once you reach that state. And also, the goal of internal penetration testing is to find vulnerabilities, not to find domain admin and just calling it a day. For the resources for network pen testing, you can go to Pentester Academy. They have a really good course on Active Directory and red teaming. Also, it's a bit costly, so yeah, financial reasons. Hack the Box is a really good place to start if you are into network pen testing. It only teaches you the specific endpoint penetration testing, like a single target, but it's still a pretty good starting place. IPSEC's Hack the Box walkthrough is a really, really good resource. He not only talks about commands or tools that he uses, but he also talks out loud what he thinks. So you can look at his methodology or look at his logical assumptions while he's doing Hack the Box, and that really, really helps you. So notes on documentation, pretty much the same thing as well. But if you're doing something once, you do not want to do it again, especially on a penetration testing engagement or any kind of security related work. So for example, you've created your own custom payload, you did this multi-step exploitation, and then you just move on because you have this adrenaline rush that you got a shell back. And then when you have to write the report, you have to go back and do that thing all over again. And you don't want to do that. So when you're doing documentation, make sure to do it step by step. Also take some screenshots as well. So as far as I know, there is no global standardization of penetration testing. As far as I know, every country has their own things. And I believe the US has their own public sector penetration testing guide that's NIST 800 something something. But for the private sector and for the things that we want to follow, the PTS, penetration testing execution standards, is a pretty good place to start. And if you look at it, it kind of logically makes sense too. You go over some pre-engagement, a lot of documentation and administrative work, and then you go into intelligence gathering, which is enumeration. You do some threat modeling, you find probably some vulnerability through your enumeration phase, you do some analysis on it. And then when you're ready, you do exploitation, and then you do post-exploitation, doing all sorts of local privilege or lateral movements, and then you do reporting. Logically makes sense. So PTS is something that we're going to follow for this week. Pre-engagement, a lot of boring documentation stuff that we really don't care, but we probably should care. The thing is, if you're joining the workforce, and a lot of the times you're probably going to be working in a technical role, all of this pre-engagement stuff will be done by your manager, your boss, or anyone that's higher than you. However, it is still very, very important because anything that you do outside of these kind of documentations will work against you, and you might face some financial or legal circumstances. And also, it's a really good idea to just know how a penetration testing works, from top to bottom. So starting from request for proposal, it's pretty much the client saying, hey, I have this like 2-week engagement, who wants to work for me? And then a lot of service providers will respond back with response to proposal saying, hey man, pick me, pick me. And then when you get a engagement going on, the service provider will request some information through request for information. Now, usually people think that penetration testing should be done like completely black box. And that is true if you want like a most effective penetration testing out of it. But usually penetration testing engagements last for like 1 week or 2 weeks. So if you're, for example, if you're like a 3-people team going into a 2-week engagement and you have 9,000 endpoints to do an engagement on, there's no way that you're going to cover everything, And that's why the service provider gives some request for information. It's pretty much help me to help you type of thing. And then we talk about statement of work, which is a bunch of business related stuff. You go through the project details, what's the goal of the project, some monies related stuff, and the deliverables and the timeline. And then lastly, this is the most important thing for us, the technical people, and that is the rules of engagement. So the rules of engagement is pretty much the client and the service provider coming into the same plane talking about, okay, so we are allowed to do this, we're allowed to interact with this server, but we cannot touch that server. Those kind of things goes into rules of engagement. And one of the most important thing is the scope. Pretty much any kind of target that you're allowed to interact with or not allowed to interact with. And the scope is really important, so we're going to go into it. So the #1 golden rule of thumb of scope is that never touch anything out of scope. If you do, you violate CFAA, the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, in US particular. Other countries have their own laws, and chances are you're screwed. Your manager is screwed, your company is screwed, and there might be some financial or legal circumstances that follow if you touch anything out of scope. Now if you do, like people make mistakes, and also like the client might give you the wrong IP address ranges, like people always make mistakes. If you do, just contact your manager and then your point of contact soon, and hope things get worked out. However, there are some times that you need to expand the scope. For example, let's say you're doing a penetration testing on a web application, right? So there is a web application hooked up with a database that sits inside the client's network. And the client says, hey man, don't touch our database server, just only do your stuff on the web application. And you're like, okay, sure. And then you do some testing and you think you found like a critical vulnerability that might modify the data inside the database. And let's say this is like a banking web application that you can like, configure or modify, tamper around the data inside the database. This is a really big thing. But due to scope, you can't really test this. In this case, you just you probably want to talk with your point of contact first and get an approval out of it. And if you explain logically, there's a very high chance that the point of contact will be like, yeah, sure, like we'll create a dummy account for you and you can mess around the data in there. So there are some times that you do need to expand the scope. If that time comes, always communicate first. Always ask your point of contact, ask your manager, communicate. So the next step of penetration testing is enumeration. And here we go through OSINT. So OSINT is probably more done in the external penetration testing, not really in web application or internal testing, but OSINT is a really interesting and important step, so we're going to go over it. OSINT is an abbreviation of open source intelligence, and it is the practice of researching publicly available information in order to gain knowledge. So OSINT is a vast area, and if you just Google OSINT, OSINT methodology, how to do OSINT, you get a ton of resources. So we cannot really go over everything here. We're just going to go over like briefly. So you can find some personal data about the employees using like Facebook, GitHub, Twitter, Reddit, whatever, pretty much any kind of social media that you can find. One of the interesting things that I found was like some security engineers talking about what they deployed in terms of antivirus and EDR solutions inside their organization. for me, as a red teamer, for example, hey, that's a good thing. Like, I can now research, like, hey, you deployed CrowdStrike? Thank you, man. Now I can test my payloads against CrowdStrike. So anything that you can find through open source can be really valuable to you if you're doing any kind of external penetration testing or red teaming. For sure, then you can use it to find like perimeter services or servers of the organization. Another interesting OSINT that you can do is Google dorking. It's pretty much like fancy way of talking like advanced search in Google. And the clients, the organizations over the past couple of years are doing a really good job on their perimeter security. However, they still make mistakes. Like I've gotten 2 bug bounties out of just simply Googling. I know some colleagues of mine also got a bug bounty just by Google dorking. So it is still possible to find like sensitive information of organizations. And there are a lot of more like OSINT tools that we're not going to go over it. Yeah. Enumeration in terms of internal network pentesting, pretty much Mmap is the way to go. If you're a red teamer, chances are you're not going to do a port scan, or if you do, you're going to do a really sophisticated port scan using your own tool. However, if you're doing internal penetration testing, you don't really care about the blue team, so you just use Mmap, you just roll with it. I believe everyone uses Mmap, like that's the first tool that you use in CSEC 101, so I'm not going to like describe what it is. But yeah, you can give a lot of flags on Mmap as well, like T3 for speed, SV for service banner grabbing, SU for UDP scans, PM for skipping host discovery, TACP specific ports. SC is actually default script scan, not just script scan. Mmap has this like tag default scripts, and tag SC will make Mmap run those, and IL for like list of IP addresses instead of like typing every single IP addresses that you have. There are more enumeration that you can do once you're inside the client's network. DNS enumeration using DNS brute forcing, or possibly zone transfer, even though zone transfers are not really that common nowadays. You can do host enumeration using CPEL. CPEL is a C# host enumeration tool that you can just run off in the memory. So CPEL is being really popular these days. For Active Directory enumeration, Bloodhound is the way to go. Bloodhound will probably just gather every information that you want to know about Active Directory, like OUs, organization units, users, servers, services, you name it, and a whole lot more. And then it'll provide you like a GUI mapping of those things, and it'll like show you like, hey, what's the shortest path to domain admin if I have this user on this host? And then like Bloodhound will draw out the shortest path to domain admin. It's amazing if you use it on a like any kind of Active Directory environment. It's amazing. PowerView is a PowerShell-based Active Directory or any kind of enumeration tool. I believe it was based off of PowerSploit, but yeah, another really good tool to use. And Rubius, you can use it for anything related with Active Directory Kerberos. And yeah, you can also use a lot of vulnerability scanners for doing more enumeration on Active Directory. So you've done your enumeration, you've done your OSINT, you've done your boring documentation work through pre-engagement. So what do? You start your analysis. So one of the common mistakes that people have, like when they're first joining like offensive security area, is that they think that a lot of attackers will just suddenly pull out some 0 days from their pocket and then just drop it. That's really not the case. If you're especially doing this as a job, you don't have time to develop 0 days. You can, but you won't really have that much time. So the first thing that you do is to go after the low-hanging fruits. And this is what real-world attackers do as well. Like they go after some of the easy stuff first, and then they try to do more complicated stuff. So the low-hanging fruit are the easy stuff. So for example, this could be like common service misconfigurations, default passwords, outdated OS, outdated applications. And Active Directory is actually super nice. If you have a single domain user in Active Directory, or even without a domain user, Active Directory is really kind. So if you ask it nicely, it gives you a lot of information back. It's truly a beautiful thing for us. So yeah, so you gather more information through enumeration, and it's time to exploit. Going back to OSINT, if you have found anything useful in OSINT, this is the time that you use it. So this could be like some secret keys uploaded in GitHub. If there's like a random developer pushing like company code into their private repo, maybe it happens. You can use it against them. You can also create some customized password list using all of the information that you have about a specific target. And yep. Also, a lot of information that you have found through mmap, like Bloodhound, PowerView, all of those things can be used for analysis. So you go over some of the low-hanging fruits, outdated OS or services, misconfigured services, any kind of interesting stuff in the Active Directory. Yeah, we're not going Active Directory because we have to it's a really, really extensive part, so we're skipping over that. But hey, are there any web services, custom web applications that we can go over maybe? Everything that you found in enumeration phase will be used in this analysis phase to help you on the exploitation phase. So the most important part here is enumeration. Yeah, no, this is not how you actually do it. But for external stuff, if you're doing external web application, you can go over some, OWASP top 10 or any kind of web application related vulnerabilities and use it for exploitation. If you're doing a really long red teaming engagement, you can start with phishing, any kind of credential harvesting or man-in-the-middle attack using phishing is really good. Maybe you can use some attachments, even though a lot of email gateways will cut you off nowadays because they're really advanced. Or you can go over some forgotten servers because not every client is perfect. They don't follow, best security practices ever. So they sometimes forget that they spin up a server, and then maybe they just forget about it. And you can maybe use some default credentials or password spraying against it. Internally, if you're already inside, you can use weak credentials. So you can do password spraying and maybe get a hold of a domain user or two. Hopefully, fingers crossed. You can also do hash cracking. You can search for weak services that has weak service accounts that has weak service passwords, and then do Kerber roasting or ASRep roasting. You can also just not crack the hash and just pass the hash through SMB, WMI, or over pass the hash in Kerberos. You can also do man-in-the-middle attack. For example, there's a tool called Responder that can do all sorts of man-in-the-middle attack, but the most famous one is NBTNS, the NetBIOS naming services, and you can grab or sniff the NTLM hash of a user trying to access a SMB share, and then you can pass the hash and gain access. Also looking for misconfiguration, old applications, and again, Active Directory is really nice, so this is how you do actual exploitation. Some of the cleanups. After you do exploitation, you have to clean up because this is a professional environment. So the number one rule here will be to leave the environment in the same state you found it. It's really easy. So remove any kind of persistence if you had, remove or kill any other shells that you have, any other files that you uploaded, even though the best security practice will be doing everything living off the land. So don't upload or don't touch disk of your client's endpoints. Don't just do that. And yeah, make a note of any kind of discoveries that you found, any kind of things or artifacts you created, and hand it off to the blue team just in case and just to double check that every artifact that you created has been deleted. Reporting, the most important part of your job, pretty much. It's the part that everyone don't really like. However, it is the most important part. For example, let's say you're the client. You did an engagement with a firm, and in the end, all you get back is a paper or a report. And that report costs you $20K, $30K. So from the perspective of the client, that's all they have left at the end of the engagement. And that's why as a penetration tester, you have to be really putting all the effort into reporting. So from the bigger picture point of view, in the report, you just explain what you have found it, how you found it, why it's important, and how to fix it. That's about it. For the nuance of the paper, I don't know how to say this. English is hard. But like for the nuance, you want to be professional. Also, you have to note that report is not your diary. So you really want to leave your emotions, you want to leave your ego out from the document. And all you want to do is just put in facts, how you did it, what you have found, and why it's important. Also, don't forget that it's about the client, and helping your client should be your number one thing when you're writing your report. Why? Because business value is king. Got to make money somehow. So the report structure, every company out there has their own report structure, but this is just like a very common structure that you can use. So the first thing should be executive summary. That's targeted towards the C-suites, the people who doesn't have much time and very likely not like technical at all. So you want to explain what you found, where you found it, what's the risk, what's the monies related with it, and what's the business impact. And you want to be really quick and simple, and you don't want to put any kind of technical jargons in there because chances are they won't really understand it in the first place. And then you go over some of the project overview and methodology. Now this is geared towards more the managerial level. You just talk about what you have done, how you did it, what's the project about, and then you talk about some metrics, and then you move on to key findings and key remediations, some of the statistics related with the engagement, and lastly, you put in all of the technical details in the findings section. So what is this vulnerability? What's the impact of it? How can they actually fix it? So on quick note on remediation, you will see a lot of like starting pen testers, I will say. Like it's just simply saying on the remediation, hey man, just patch it, just upgrade the version, just turn it off. It's easy fix, man. It's really not. Like anything IT related in the real world, it's not easy as far as I know. Like most of the time it's really complicated. A lot of different things are like entangled with each other. So you can't really simply upgrade it. You can't really simply turn it off most of the time. So the number one rule when you're writing the remediation part is to never assume the client's infrastructure. Never assume that it's easy or simple. Never assume that they don't have any legacy system because chances are they have legacy systems. And you can't really assume their budget and time. You can't like literally say, hey man, just ditch out this web server, use that web server instead. No, like from the company's point of view, they have to hire more people who knows that web server or who knows that tech stack. So you can't really assume the client's infrastructure like that. Lastly, it's a really good practice to provide multiple potential remediation. And this is where your experience as a builder and the defender comes in, because if you know, or if you have built this specific thing, whether it's a web application or Active Directory or whatever, if you have built this thing and you have defended before, chances are you know multiple ways to mitigate the same vulnerability. But if you have no like base knowledge whatsoever, you just say, hey, just turn it off and call it a day. So this is where the experience of the builder and the defender really kicks in. All right, lastly, if you're really into this stuff or if you want to learn more, come to RVAT, even though I just canceled it last time, but yeah, come to RVAT. We go over some of the basics of penetration testing. We also want to go over some like red teaming tools, like custom tool creation and stuff, even though we don't really have that much like participation. But yeah, RVAT is a interest group that does mostly this kind of things. Also, if you're really interested, apply for CPTC next year as well. CPTC is a collegiate penetration testing competition that around like 60, 70 schools in the United States, Europe, and like Middle Eastern compete nowadays. So it's becoming like an international competition. So if you're really interested, get to the team, try out next year. Come just ask anyone in the CPTC team. You can ask me as well. All right, cool. Are there any questions?
Are most of the mentioned like a ton of different tools and all that. Are they all like open source or free use, stuff like that, or are they like paid services?
Yeah, most of the time, if you're doing penetration testing, most of the tools that you're using will be like open source. If you're doing red teaming, due to the nature of what you're doing as a job, most of the things will be proprietary. I don't know how to say that word, but yeah. Yeah, sure. Wait.
Oh, basically, yeah, the question.
Oh. Oh, my bad. Okay. Oh, shit. All right. I'm not thinking straight today. So should I do this again then? Okay. Oh, the question was, do you use open source tools for like this kind of things? So, yeah. That took me a long time to understand. Jesus Christ. Yeah. All right. I think that's about it then. Cool. Thank you. All right, thank you.
Let me get the Zoom link for those guys real quick.
So there's